Well, why don't we get started? Thank you all for coming. I'm sure Greg will join us in a minute. One of the things that we wanted to talk with the school committee about, because you're one of the biggest pieces of our operating budget, is the joint meeting that's coming up on, we think, May 11th. Is that confirmed at this point that it's going to be May 11th?
Yes.
Excellent, because
I need to confirm with the school committee, so they're here tonight. So
okay, great.
I was going to be in Bora Bora that night.
I know. You could put that background on.
You probably get a cheap flight.
I think they have that background available. You could pretend.
Probably. No, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to put the Madeira Islands or something. You know?
There you go.
So I'll call the meeting to order officially, and that will be on. There's Greg. Okay, and that will be on the record. I want to thank. One of the benefits of this format is people really have weighed in quite a bit more. I think I just noticed in some of the work that we've done on the finance committee, people have really asked some excellent questions and have provided a lot of feedback to the group work, which sometimes can feel a little rushed. So thank you to everybody. And when I sent that, well, I'll get back to that later on. I want to thank Greg, because I know Greg is working his butt off trying to get this information to us. And we had a lot of questions at last week's meeting. So we'll get to that after we meet with the school committee. But since the school committee is here, I'll just open it up by saying the finance committee is concerned about long-term planning, both in terms of uncertain revenues, which we may be receiving. They comprise about a third of our budget. And I mean, by that, I mean meals tax, hotels, all those things that have pretty much ground to a halt. So that was the letter that went out requesting the hiring freeze and the non-essential spending right now, which we appreciate. We talked a little bit about that at the budget subcommittee. But then moving forward, we'd like to touch on that a little bit at the joint meeting and get your input on what you think will be important to put on the agenda for that night. But before we start, I think I'll ask Jim if you could just talk about the state of the schools right now and what's going on. I forget where we talked about what some of the unexpected costs and then also some of what the savings might be available right now. I think we talked already about how staff were being deployed and how I know the guidance came out. What did it come out? Midnight Friday night to schools about what they should do from now until the end of the year. So there's a lot that you're managing. But in terms of the budget itself, Jim, maybe you could give us an update on that.
Sure, and Dr. Gifford, please jump in with anything that you think is important. I think it's important to know that we're operating. We yes, technically are not in any of our school buildings, but we're operating and we're serving kids every day. And we have been right since the start, and it's been incredibly difficult, I'll say, to get that up and running and to figure out, how best to reach students and their families. And it would be one thing if you had a year to plan this and you were going to try and do this as a strategic initiative, but to do it on the fly is really challenging. So I think last time we talked about some things that, that were sort of up in the air in terms of the school budget. I'll say there's been some developments since we last met a couple of weeks ago that are positive in terms of us understanding where we are. We've come to collective bargaining agreements with most of our groups, tentative agreements that are just currently being finalized. So with our Dartmouth Educators Association teachers group, nurses group, secretaries group, administrators group, all collective bargaining agreements that we feel are, a good compromise for both parties. So we're pleased that we could reach those agreements. We have one collective bargaining group left to work with, and We're going to be meeting again soon next week, and hopefully we hope to finalize that one at that time. So that will take all of that out of the picture, which helps me a lot, because obviously getting to a bottom line when you still have and an understanding of where we're going to be at the end of the year, when you still have those things out there, is particularly challenging. There's still a number of things that, you know, we haven't quite determined the level of savings, and some things that are going to cost us money. So it's what I would say is that with certainty that we normally do not turn any substantial amount of money back to the town at the end of a fiscal year. And I can say that we will return money this year. I can't tell you how much. I don't think anybody in my position in any school district can tell you right now. There's just so much still going on and still uncertain. But there are things that, you know, have a negative impact on in terms of saving money, and then things that go in the opposite direction. I mentioned a bunch of them last time. Utilities being a fairly big one, bus transportation also being a large issue. That's still an unresolved issue, because we do have a contractual relationship with our transportation provider, and there's some move at the legislative level to address that, and to attempt to help us determine, without having to individually arbitrate each of these contracts, how much we're gonna owe, because these companies bought or leased buses on our behalf. They you know, and they have an operation there that, you know, insured buses on our behalf. And so we do recognize that if we were to litigate that, we would owe some money. So we know that. So we're trying to work through that. That's a big unknown in the budget, but it's also an area that likely will produce savings. But there are other areas that are costing us money. I mean, we're not receiving any money in preschool tuition right now. And we are serving preschool kids, but the level of service is not such that we can, you know, it's a very different thing from what parents were paying for previously. So we're losing money there. We're certainly losing money in the food service program. You know, we're providing what I would say is fantastic service to the community, more than 3,000 meals a week, going out to hungry kids. But you know, that's not without cost. And we are fortunate that we're receiving some reimbursement for those costs, but also doesn't make up for the fact that, you know, normally, yes, 3,000 meals is a lot, but normally we serve a lot more than that. And we get a lot more revenue than this when we operate. So there's issues, you know, certainly on that side of the operation as well. We continue to operate and will continue to operate and you know, utilize our staff through the end of the year. We're now focusing on sort of, now that we know, you know, as of last week that school's no longer, unfortunately, you know, an option for the rest of the year. It does in some ways shift our focus and allow us to plan for the longer term. So we're in the process of doing that. I guess I'd say that there's more questions than answers still, which I think is kind of common at this point in time. You're on mute, Terry.
I am. That's a good start, Jim. Why don't I turn it to the committee and see if anybody from the Finance Committee has questions on the present situation. Okay. Oh, Gloria, thank you. Yep.
So Jim, you kind of started off by saying that since you last came to us, what was that, April 9th, that you have some answers. Can you elaborate a little bit? Like what do you know since that you didn't know back on April 9th?
Sure. So some of the things that have happened since then, obviously the big one that I was alluding to was the collective bargaining agreement. So those were all outstanding as of April 9th. So, you know, we feel pretty fortunate that we've now come to a tentative agreement. None of them have been finalized, and we're going through that process right now. So I certainly don't want to put the cart before the horse, but we feel that we've gotten those resolved. And that is a big, really, it's been too long. And, you know, the teachers and other staff have been, you know, working this whole year without a contract. And we started bargaining these a year and a half ago. So it was a long haul to get to this point. So that would be certainly the most significant thing that we know. You know, some other things that we understand in terms of expenses are, especially in the area of special education, that every week there's new developments in what we're supposed to provide, how we're going to provide it, what the money situation is relative to that. The fact that we are continuing to pay for our out-of-district students is something that you know, is a relatively new development, probably since we last spoke, in that they are receiving some services from their school. Department of Ed has instructed us to continue to pay those, so we are in fact doing that. Now that's sort of towards the that's towards the spending, not saving side for sure, because a significant amount of money. But there's also, to go along with that, there's a lot of things that are still up in the air in terms of, we have compliance issues with federal requirements for special ed spending that we still don't understand. Yes, we're paying these out-of-district providers, but we have spending thresholds that we have to meet that it looks like we're unlikely to meet, which would then jeopardize grant funding. And so far, there's not waivers for all this. So I think there will be, because I think a lot of other communities are going to be in a similar boat that we are. So I think that will result in lots more things. But every week there's new developments in what we do, how we do it, it's a hectic pace for sure.
Bob?
Next question. Yeah,
I got
Jim,
you.
Bob Gorvin. How many students do you have from outside the district this year or next year? What's the plan for that?
Out of district tuition students? Is that what you're referring to, or
Yeah,
are
I
you
mean,
referring
I
to school
think-
choice students?
School
coming in?
choice. That's the term I want.
Yeah. So we are shooting for approximately 120 students.
Okay, and so how many students? What's the difference between last year and this year?
We would estimate for approximately the same number of students.
Okay,
So about 30 students per class is what we attempt to.
okay,
But we also don't prohibit a sophomore from applying. So it doesn't always end up being exactly, even.
okay.
So we will consider an application from a different grade. So that sort of throws things off a little bit.
Okay, so that's a revenue source for you, and you're comfortable with the quantity, the quantity of students that are coming in from outside the district.
It is, and it's crucial because that's how we're, to be honest, if we didn't have that right now, I don't know what we'd be doing with our education system right now, because all of those Chromebooks, well, not all of them, a lot of the Chromebooks, our whole one-to-one initiative is funded through school choice. So
Okay.
if we didn't have that source of revenue, we wouldn't have Chromebooks to give to kids. I don't think kids would be nearly as connected as they are during this issue. So it's important that, and the school committee has voted to continue that for next year. It's a yearly decision, so it's not something that's a guarantee long term, but it certainly is important right now. I've never seen it illustrated more so, really.
Okay.
Any other questions? Adam?
So can you hear me?
Yeah, you're
sorry.
you're
Sorry
faint,
about that.
but yes.
Yeah, it's my computer. As far as the Chromebooks go, is there any talk or any this is a two-part question. Is there any thought about expanding that program at some point? I know it's kind of a strange time to ask, but I'm gearing up toward a question about, it's not fiscal year 20, but in fiscal year 21, is your budget assuming that everything is going to start right back up on time? And is it safe to say that's going to happen? Or are you guys planning on potentially not starting up on time?
Sadly, I think it's not safe to say that it's going to happen.
Right.
But we are definitely planning for it to happen.
Are you
So
budgeting for the contingency of, what expenses would look like if you?
we would assume, in essence, Adam, what we're doing is we are assuming we will be in operation. If we are not in operation, depending on the impact on, there's a lot of moving parts. So depending on the impact on grant funding, which could be, if this were to continue long term and federal and state grants were diminished, we could be in trouble. If federal and state grants are close to level funded, then we would be solvent if we had to operate remotely. But we also would, I think, want to do some things differently. We would want to expand, like you said, the ability to put technology. If we were thinking, okay, we might not have school next year, we would obviously want to expand our technology offerings to families, and that would come at a cost for sure that we'd have to balance those savings with. As best we could, or seek additional funding, I guess. But if it were available, but there is a lot of uncertainty with grant funding, and we have a lot of grant funding that supports our activities directly. Supports staff salaries.
Grant funding?
Couple $2 million, and for instance, our special ed grant is about $1 million alone. So if that were to, be reduced significantly, it would, there's no fluff in it. It supports our special ed summer school. It supports our directly teaching and teacher assistant staff who work with kids every day, is out of district tuitions. Those are the only things it pays. So we can't do without any of those. So any cut. So there's a lot of uncertainty, it's,
Okay.
it weighs on me, I'll tell you, every day.
Jeff, you had your hand up. You
Sure,
muted,
Jeff.
Joe. You muted, Jeff.
How's that? It's easier to ask the question when I'm muted.
No,
This isn't a budget question so much, but what happens to for all the elementary kids and middle school kids advancing to the next grade and to graduate seniors? I mean, did they have to make up the time before they can advance to the in classes?
Bonnie, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll take that. So as Terry alluded to, the governor, when he closed the schools for the rest of the year, DESE, Department of Education, just recently released what we're calling prerequisite standards. And those are essential standards that they feel they're identified by school, by grade level. And those are the standards they're assuming or stating that students should have and learn to be able to be successful in the next year. With that said, we've already started our plans this week. We have our coaches working with our grade level teams, identifying what standards, aligned with DESE, what standards we've already accomplished, what standards we are going to try to teach from May 4th on, and then what we'll push to next year. We know there are going to be gaps to close for next year. We're going to have curriculum adjustments starting. We're looking to have a curriculum summit this year, this summer, hopefully with that we have some funding to be able to do that, which we've done every year where teachers are involved in curriculum alignment. We obviously know we're going to have gaps that we need to close. But with this new, I think to your question is, kids are moving along. Kids are going to move along. but all teachers are involved in understanding what standards need to be taught for next year. Everyone's in collaboration, so they'll move along, but we know that our curriculum has to be adjusted, and we're working on that already.
And you think eventually it'll catch up?
That's what, yes. And we talked this week, again, we're looking at funding, as Mr. Kiley just said. But one of the things we're hoping to be able to offer this year, every year we offer summer school, and we're planning on offering a virtual academic summer school starting in July, particular sessions that teachers can teach specific classes rather than, a summer school kind of camp thing. And we're hoping that can help close some gaps and help kids catch up as well.
So kids might be required to do that.
I say required, and matter of fact, to your point, I'm putting out a new informational document. I was hoping tonight, but I think it's going to go out tomorrow because I'm having folks check it over for me as well. Just our next steps, because now we are, with this new guidance and with the closure of the schools, we're actually implementing more live sessions of actual teaching with the new standards, where we've kind of been on hold. We've offered enrichment lessons, etc. So we are moving forward with offering live sessions of more teaching remotely. We cannot guarantee that all students are connecting, but we're doing our darndest to get them on board, get kids connecting. We have a good plan at the high school for how we're grading students. I'm putting those words in the new document about expectations are. There's a required summative assessment, etc. So as much as we can push forth and say those things, expected, required, there are still some families that for some reason or other, and I understand the stress they're under, we don't know what families are going through, that just haven't connected yet, as much as our counselors are reaching out, etc. So we understand there are going to be gaps, but we're going to do everything we can to keep kids caught up and move them on.
Any other questions, Bob?
Yeah. How does it work? Like, if I had a history class at 10 o'clock, do all the kids like log in and then the teacher's there, and how does that work?
I won't say all the kids do, but yeah.
Yeah.
So we're using various platforms. One of the things we use is called Google Classroom. And we actually just had a demonstration last night with the school committee. Our instructional technology teachers showed how the Google Classroom is set up. And it's a remote classroom where I can, just like this, or teachers can use Zoom just like this. And they're posting lessons, they can post videos, they can provide feedback to kids. One of the things we're doing now is some lessons are live like this where kids can log in, but we're also recording them so we can archive them for folks that may have a conflict or just didn't get to it. Those important standards that we need to teach. We're asking the building principals we can't organize and schedule all of that from a district level. We're laying the expectations, but the building principals are working hard to help teachers organize those schedules.
Yeah, it's amazing that you've done this so fast, because it's such a big project.
It's huge, and I don't, people don't understand, I think, sometimes the complexities of everything. The one thing I will say with, again, the technology we've been able to purchase without knowing this is happening, those school choice funds that allowed us to provide 8 through 12 with the Chromebooks, and enough Chromebook carts in the schools that were then dismantled. And we gave out about over 400 devices to families that had nothing.
Wow.
And so, we're hoping to get them all back eventually, but at least it gives kids access. But within days of the closure, we had an enrichment page up on our website that was, teachers started to put at least activities, etc. But now they're in lots of collaboration going on across the district, and they're starting real teaching mode, if you will.
Is this a new model for snow days?
We've talked about it. Absolutely. Absolutely. We might not lose any snow time anymore.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Boo.
Yes. Okay, we know what this year's budget has been. how do you expect next year's budget to be in comparison?
That was a nice segue into the next part. And so we had read the request from the town administrator and Greg for a hiring freeze and stopping any non-essential spending. So I know the school committee received that. Do you want to update us on what the plans are for next year? Jim, do you want to go?
Sure. Thank you, Terry. So we are only looking at essential hires right now. And we do have some. I mean, we're looking, our goal is to continue to provide service to kids. So and high quality service. So we need to be able to do that. And it is going to cost some money to do that, obviously. Our budget is anticipating us for FY21 to be back up and running at a level pre-closure. So our hope is that we're providing sort of a level service, always hoping to do better, of course, but at least provide the same level of service that we were before we, got into this mess. So
You have a follow-up?
that's our planned this budget in a different world than it is right now, unfortunately. So, so if that changes, we'll have to adjust, just like we're adjusting in FY20.
Okay. Lou?
How does your anticipation in terms of capital budget for next year?
We did have capital requests. I was unclear as to, I thought that those would largely be pushed to October, so I haven't, if there's potential for some of them to be funded, we have the ability to get some projects done. So, I have a great staff. Rick Ferreira, who I work with so closely with facilities, is fantastic about pulling projects together. Some of the things that we could work on this summer, if we're able to do that, if we're able to get in the buildings and complete these projects, that would be great. But again, obviously, we understand the constraints that the town is going to be under in terms of overall finance, and we respect that. So we'll work within, the town's always been very good to us for capital improvements, and so we're thankful for that.
Okay. Peppy?
Hi, I'm new on this committee, and I'm also new as relatively new as a full-time resident, and I do not have children in the school system. But I would just love to get, whomever wants to speak, can tell me what the key challenges are for the Dartmouth school system in today's world. I mean, what are your key challenges, your key issues, and how you're trying to address them?
So do you mean amidst the crisis?
No,
Or
no, I'm not talking about the crisis.
moving
I'm
forward.
really talking, no, thank you. I'm talking about really, if everything else were even, what are your key challenges? What are you trying to achieve? And how is the town supporting that?
Okay. Dr. Gifford, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll start. I think aside from money, I want to put money aside because everything always boils down to, do you have the funds to do what you really want to do? But I think the last couple of years, what I would see is key. First of all, I'll back up. We have been able to, with the town's blessing and the absolute support that we've received, been able to hire the staff that we need to support our kids. We felt we were in a very good place just leaving this past year. And with that, I mean, the mental health illnesses that have happened, the mental health issues that are going on, and our ability to be able to try to support all of those students, not only mental health, but as you know, more and more, we want our kids, no matter what their disability might be, to be in our schools. We want them to be with their peers, et cetera. So to be able to do that and really support and educate all kids, I think that's our biggest challenge, because our teachers want to do that. They want to do the best job they can by all kids. but we don't always have the tools, to be honest, the knowledge, especially with the mental health issues that have been happening. So with that said, we've been able to, with the support of the town, hire those folks that we need to help, our social workers, our school psychologists. We recently, last year, just hired a behavior, we call it a BCBA, where it's about behavior therapy, et cetera, et cetera. So I would hate to see that with this crisis that we have to go backwards, because those are the things we've come a long way. And, you know, we can handle curriculum, we can handle math lessons, et cetera. But if you take away those supports that are so important to support all kids, I would say that's one of our biggest challenges. Mr. Kiley, I mean, you might agree, or?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, if you look at, and we were talking about it with the school committee last night, if you look at some of the things that we've been able to accomplish in the last several years and bring on board instructional technology specialists. Well, I don't know how we do what we do every day during this crisis without our instructional technology specialists. They've been instrumental. They wouldn't exist in a world where we weren't funded adequately. So, you know, we're still, I mean, if you look at our funding level, we have, I always like to say, we have great bang for our buck. We're low per pupil spending, but a high achieving district. So, I mean, I think we do a great job. And there's a lot of pieces that go into that, including things that we've added over the last 5 years that we hope not to go backwards. So we proposed a level service budget for FY21 in the hopes that we understood that it was not an easy financial fiscal year coming up, and we're respectful of that, but we hope to be able to maintain that strong level of service for kids.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Well,
I just want, and this is for make sure, Greg, these numbers are right. So you're asking for 44,283,000 compared to last year 43,124. So that's like a 2.7% increase. Is that right, Greg?
The numbers I put in the budget are what he gave me. So
Schedule A, okay. And does that, the number that's in the budget, does that include the increases from the collective bargaining agreement?
Yeah, so we built in a projected increase.
Okay.
In anticipation that we would settle some point during this year, and fortunately we have. So yes, it does include that.
Okay, and just one more question, and I won't ask it anymore. Okay, so your capital budget is $1 million. You're asking for $1,045,000, and 80% of that is coming from surplus revenue,
Mm-hmm.
and 200,000 is from the tax levy for school technology and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And based on what you're going through now, do you think that 200,000 is enough for next year?
We could always use more. You know, I mean, as I said, that school choice money that you asked about has been so instrumental, because basically the 200,000 sort of keeps us afloat, and it, you know, that basically is just a replacement of existing hardware. There's no improvement in that 200,000, and then the money that we have with school choice is really our money where we're able to step it up and make dramatic improvements, like handing everybody at the high school a Chromebook. So, I mean, of course we could use more. If this doesn't continue, we will need to purchase more. If this does continue and we don't get back to school, I'm really hoping that that's not the case. But I mean, we can always use more technology for sure, and we can expand. One of the proposals this year was to expand middle school one-to-one computing. We didn't fund it in the budget. So,
Okay.
So you know, we had $750,000 worth of requests from our principals that we didn't fund.
Okay.
So,
I'm just concerned that $200,000 isn't enough.
it's not a lot. It's not a lot. It just, you know, like I said, it's just to try and keep us afloat, basically. But
I have a question about the capital budget, because I think in our discussions on the finance committee, there is some confusion about what will be, whether we'll be recommending capital in the spring and then again in the fall. And I wonder what has been reviewed by the capital improvement committee in terms of school capital projects. That's a question for Greg, right?
All the requests as submitted for the fiscal 21 budget have been reviewed. They submitted the fiscal 21 through 25 year plan, so they show their projects through a 5-year period. The committee looks at all of that, but focuses on the budget, which is voted by is what's actually voted at town meeting. So all of those requests for review, we had budget hearings in which Jim and Bonnie attended. What we recommended in the spring was specific to items that they felt they could address during the summer. So anything that could wait till the fall, we delayed, but anything for which they had plans to address during the summer, we included in the plan.
Okay.
Not including technology. Technology is a regular expenditure. So everything else was, again, is a summer project. And the feeling is that by funding it now, it allows them to complete it during the time which is most conducive for completing it. Of course, at the time, we weren't assuming they were going to be not having school during the regular year.
All right. So then we will be looking at projects in the spring, it sounds like. So it sounded, Jim, to me like you weren't clear on whether we were going to be moving.
I had discussed a few weeks ago the possibility of delaying some of the requests, but it is at this time we are making a request for the capital projects for the spring.
Okay. I saw a couple hands, Jeff and then Gloria. Jeff?
Greg, just correct me if I'm wrong, the fall capital spending is going to focus on the availability of free cash as of 7/1/20. Correct?
That is correct.
So the 7/1, so if 7/1/20 free cash is substantially reduced, then some of these projects that people have been putting off till the fall meeting as they have in the past may not get funded.
That is correct.
Okay.
And somebody else, Gloria.
Yeah, this question is for either Jim or Bonnie. So Jim, in the past, when you've given us presentations, you've always also shared with us what requests you were unable to meet. You know, some of your building requests that you were unable to meet. With this level service budget, what are the most significant requests that, you know, you kind of feel bad about it, that you're not able to meet with this budget?
Yeah, we had a lot. As I mentioned, we had about a little more than $750,000. It was a 1.8% budget increase that we did not fund. And I will say that I work with a great group of people, the principals and department heads and staff that inform these requests all have the best of intentions. They come up with great rationales why kids would benefit from this. And unfortunately, we have to prioritize. So I would say that some of the bigger ticket items that we were unable to fund this year were at the high school, social worker, at the middle school, a reading specialist, at the Cushman School, a special ed teacher, DeMello School, that could possibly have been shared with the Cushman School, but a special ed teacher, some instructional technology, the Potter School, we had, let's see, well, we found a creative way around that one. A behavioral specialist, we did a district behavioral specialist, so we took care of some of their needs. Quinn School was looking for a teacher and a special ed teacher. That we sort of increased class size in order to accommodate things, and weren't able to fill those positions. There's lots of important things in lots of other areas. Special ed was looking for occupational therapy help, and there's all a defined need. They all have good rationales. They present them to us in a thoughtful way. We cringe when we can't do it, but it's the reality of things is we understand we are trying to do the best we can with what is attainable, we hope. And so that's what we've done.
Thank you.
Anybody else? So in terms of long-term planning, one of the things that we've been thinking about is after the town meeting, looking at where things land in terms of the budget and revenues coming in. And then perhaps sometime in the late summer, sooner if we have the information, getting together with the select board and with the school committee to assess further where we actually are, because we'll be recommending a budget and we may find in the fall that we're falling short of funding that. So is that something that, I'm not asking for a vote on this, but does this make sense to the school committee and to both of you? And would you be favorable in participating in that process? How does this work? I know we have to ask the school committee because they're the people in charge, but I guess I'm looking for some general feedback, because I don't know about you, but some of the joint meetings that we've had with the school committee and the select board have been a little less than entertaining. And we're hoping to have a productive conversation when we meet and kind of be future focused with this. So that involves everybody thinking it's a good idea. John?
Yeah, hi Terry. Yeah, that's fine with me. I would make, the end of August, I would make myself available. I'll be around.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any ideas about that or any input?
I mean, I think what you have to do, it's almost taking a step back and seeing exactly what is going on at that point in time and what's the situation with this pandemic. Are we fully up and operational? Are we still semi-quarantined? Still doing a social distancing? What is up with, all the businesses,
right,
et cetera, et cetera? What's the economy doing?
Right.
Not only here, but nationwide.
And to add to what Mr. Nunes just said, we need to, and I mentioned it at the budget subcommittee the other night, was we really need to have an understanding of what the legislature is going to do, both federally and state, to understand, what the impact of all this is going to be long term. And so we should have some action on that, hopefully.
Greg and then Jeff. Greg, what did you say? We didn't hear you.
I said, if you know that answer, Jim, please let me know, because I have no clue.
Maybe by August we might have a little more info.
I doubt.
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question you're asking, Terry. I mean, you say, here's your budget, but we're going to review it in a few months, and you may not have that much. So, yeah, it's hard to answer. I think that if we have to take a budget cut, if we're 10% short across the board on the budget, then the best anyone can expect is everybody will cut 10%. And then you go from there.
Yeah,
we
wouldn't.
Everybody starts to argue and negotiate about, well, I don't think we should cut 10%. You should cut 10%. That kind of thing.
We wouldn't be in a position of saying what to cut, obviously. We would be in a position of saying, this is where we are. And I think it's just important for all of us to acknowledge that even before this, we were very concerned about the state of the budget, given an across-the-board settling of contracts, a reclassification study that was put into place, and a tightening budget anyway. That we started our process back in January with that perspective. So it just becomes even more concerning. And I think it's also important to say that this finance committee is generally very supportive of what this town is doing and the work that they're doing. The school department in particular, I think people are very supportive, but also recognizing that there are limits on what the budget can bear and wanting to make sure that, it's fair and, that, that everybody has input, but that we're responsible to the taxpayer and to the town meeting. So. Okay, well, if there's no other questions to the school committee, I think we can let them, and Jim, you usually do that one-page overview. That's very helpful, and if we could see that at some point, that would be good. And Gloria, I wanted to ask, do you think it makes sense to add something in about what wasn't funded, or do you think it's sufficient in terms of the process right now?
When you say add, are you referring to our draft letter or?
Oh, no, not our letter, but from the school department. Does it make sense to share with, I guess we'll leave that to you, right? It makes sense for you to decide what makes sense to share with town meeting, because I think if we don't see it in the budget, then I don't think people realize what's not being funded. And that point was made by Bob earlier, and I think it's important that people know that they are getting some bang for their buck, as Jim put it. So. All right, Becky.
One more question, if I may. I know there are three parts, if I may, I think, three parts to the whole school budget, the school's budget. And there's the town, the 45-ish million. And then there's the amount we do the VOTEC. And then there's another amount. And again, since I'm new, what are the other two numbers?
We'll talk about that after, because that's actually not the Dartmouth School Committee. Yep. But I think another piece that you don't see in the budget is the grant funding, and I'm glad that Jim brought that up, because that is not reflected in the budget. And it is important for us to just keep in the back of our minds that you would hope it's not, because everybody's in the same boat, but we'll have to see.
Are they mostly public, state and federal grants, or are they foundations and... No, mostly public.
Almost all federal and state grants. Yeah, we fund $750,000 of existing instructional staff salaries through federal and state grants. So, and we fund a little more than $650,000 of our special ed tuition costs through federal grants. So, just right there, I mean, if we take a hit on the grants, we have a major problem too.
And that's good for us to know too, because as the school committee may not know, a third of our committee is new this year. So this is information that is helpful for them to hear.
That's great. Yeah.
Jim, if I could add one thing on the grants, Jim, your federal grants, those are on a different fiscal year, aren't they? Or?
Well, yes. So we actually, what they've done is now they align the ending of the federal grants with our fiscal year, but we have the ability to carry forward grants. So any money we wouldn't spend in this year, we could have the ability to spend it next year. But the thing is that we're paying our staff because they're working, and we're paying the tuitions because we've been instructed to do so. So we're really not going to have much money to carry forward. So I really don't see that we'll have a buffer in place for that.
So do you get most of those grants on July 1 or thereabout?
Yeah, either July 1 or September 1, but yeah.
Okay. I only bring that up because we've had some conversations internally, and it seems like for FY21, most people are just going about business as usual because they don't know about, what the economic impact is going to be of these 3 months. So I think the real picture will come in FY22 and a year from now, looking at that and trying to budget for that, because I think they'll have some numbers, and a lot of the effect of what's going on right now is really going to hit around then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, the school committee can sign off. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate the time you took to do this, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for your time.
We'll be sending something out to you next week to review, to be prepared for the May 11th meeting. Okay, so look for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Put it on my calendar already. Thank you.
Did somebody say something? No? Okay. First thing I want to say is thank you to everybody for your input to the cover letter. That was very useful. It's a little tricky in a process like this because not everybody has the same amount of time. As we talked about last week, some people are still doing a full-time job from home. And so I noted people's names at the top of that just to kind of keep track for myself and others that I did get your input. And if you weren't able to send me something in writing, there's no problem with that either. Just look over what we have right now, and if you have any feedback, please just send it to me in writing and I'll do the best I can. You can see from that draft that there were a couple questions, one from Jeff and one from Janine, that I couldn't really answer, I couldn't really incorporate, but the rest of the stuff, I think I did a pretty good job with trying to take what people said and put it in the right places. In terms of we'll get back to that. In terms of the warrant, we have answered questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 19, 20, and 21. We voted on them. And we have a rudimentary or maybe a little bit more involved rationale. Thank you, Gloria, for getting that done and getting that out. I can send that to you. If you would like to weigh in on the language, I'd be willing to take your input and work with Gloria on taking your input, or if you just want to leave it to us to do, we can do that too. Think about that for a minute. And then we have to really tackle a couple of pretty involved things tonight. I guess I'll start by asking, Greg sent out a bunch of information to answer your questions. Do you have any questions about the information that we mailed? So you had a certified surplus revenue and retained earnings analysis. You had a revolving fund balance chart. You had the stabilization funds and the OPEB. You had revisions in the warrants, the spring and the special town meeting. The Schedule A had some errors in it, I guess, and that's been updated, and I think you have the capital as well. So knowing that you've had all that, I don't know if you've had a chance to review that information, but if there are any questions, we can talk about them right now. No? Beppy?
Just one thing I do note from what Greg has sent out, some of the numbers that are in this cover memo will change, but not significantly. What we didn't get, if I may say, is those areas, those 3 or 4 things that are actually funded by the surplus before the free cash surplus. There's still some things that we spend money on from general revenues that are not clear to me, at least, what those are. So they were, you talked about some of them last year. Some of it's compensation, some of it's, oh God, I can't remember, but a few items that come out before the final budget. So we see the $91 million budget, and then there are about 4 or 5 other things. I think they include capital from the tax levy, expenditure for compensation of the tax levy, and some other things, overlay or some other things. And that's all I'd like to see is what, there are other draws on the revenue that before we actually get to a real surplus, a real free cash flow.
There are items that are not appropriated by town meeting, and some of them are quite significant. So one of them, for example, is the state gives us what they call the cherry sheet. It lists what aid it gives us, but it then assesses us millions of dollars in assessments on the, may not be millions. So that's one thing. It assesses us, for example, an amount for the Bristol Mosquito Control Board. It assesses us an amount for Bristol County, the sheriff and all that.
Yeah.
So there are a number of items there. Another one, as mentioned, is the overlay, the amount that's set aside for abatements and exemptions. Another one is offsets. So we get aid at the top, but some of that aid, for example, school choice, it's a few $100,000 in school choice, but we cannot use that money for the operating budget. That goes directly for use by the schools. So we have to take that off as an offset. Same thing with library. They get about $50,000, which we cannot use for the general budget. So again, that comes off as an offset. So those are some of the bigger items. Again, they're not approved by town meeting, but they have to come off because those are monies that are not they're either appropriated through through decisions made by officers or the state.
I completely understand all that, Greg. I'm fine with that. It's just that it just makes you wonder if we have tax revenues of X and operating expense of Y, it doesn't end up with a surplus. So you almost want to have a line required other mandated other payments, period. Doesn't even have to say what so much, but they are, that we don't have any discretion on, but they are, if it's 5 million or 3 million or some amount every year that the town's tax revenues go towards, so that we don't have to, otherwise you sort of wonder where the other 3 to 4 million go that we got. And just a plug number and say it's required. Does that make any sense to anybody else but me?
Well, you're looking at the big picture, it sounds like, and you're looking at zero sum. You're looking for, and I think that's come up in other forms. The information that Sean sent to us that talked about the need to reflect revenue in Schedule A. We don't see it on the Schedule A that we have right now, but that was the reason for the sample for the town. So yeah, I think it's
eventually we'll get there. I don't need it now. It's just a kind of trying to make this all feel like it's a puzzle that can be pieced together.
Yeah.
If you look at the 2020 Schedule A summary that was in the materials that Greg sent out, that gives you a good summation for the fiscal year 20 of all of the pieces of the revenue and how it relates to the net budget. And so we're looking for the same thing for fiscal 21. I understand.
So I saw the net. I saw that what was really there.
It shows the revenue with the overlays and the cherry sheet adjustments coming out. The first couple of pages of that summary gives you what Greg was talking about.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the materials specifically that you were sent? So do you feel like your questions were answered? It seems like we have, of the discussion that we had last week, it looks like we have the information that we need on that, right?
I would just like to, can I, Terry?
Absolutely, yeah.
Again, I would like to just make sure I understand this, or we all understand this properly with Greg. Greg, if I look at the fiscal 20 projection for the end of fiscal 20, what I read is the net operating revenues were 89.5 and the total expenses were 89.5, roughly. Not including any of the enterprise funds. So roughly it was break even for fiscal year 20.
That is that is the monies that we believe to be available for the operating budget. We set a certain amount for that, and then at the FinCom and the select board, they ended up voting about $100,000 less than what had been made available. That local receipt number is an estimate, not the actual. And if you remember in the financial projections, I showed you the difference between the estimated and the actual. So
what I'm asking you, Greg, is from these numbers on your summary from fiscal 20, what do you anticipate the free cash number to be after the auditors after it gets certified?
It will be in the millions of dollars.
I don't see that. Okay, you're going to need to show me where that's coming from.
It's not reflected in here because the two there are three major sources of free cash, just basically. Number
You don't
one.
have a problem with that, do you? Do you have a problem with that?
Yeah. Well, it seems like every time I look at a statement, well, that doesn't really reflect. I'm not used to that.
This sheet here, and what I should really show you, Jeff, is I should show you the recap that we prepare for the state. So if you recall the enterprise funds, we show the expenditures and then we show the revenue necessary to pay for those expenditures. This is basically what I
just want everything to relate back to what we're talking about here in the finance. I mean, I need to kind of see how it all fits together to be comfortable.
And I got that.
It's particularly important, Greg, because we're trying to do a cover letter here that reflects the the big picture. We want to make sure, and so we need to have the facts.
So if
Yeah.
you send the summary around that tells me about break even for fiscal 20, so I'm thinking we're not going to have much free cash available
I know.
as of 7/1, and now you tell me we're going to have millions of dollars, I'm feeling really insecure.
Okay, but very quickly, and then I will, Jeff and I probably should discuss this outside of the meeting, but basically there are three broad sources of free cash. One is carryover from what wasn't spent the year before. That has not been a big amount for us because we usually spend most of our free cash.
Right. Right.
Number two is unused appropriations. So it's what we have budgeted but not actually spent. The schools typically spend almost all their money. So if they leave us money this year, that will be atypical. However, on other budgets, we do have significant unused appropriation.
And where do I see that in your statement of fiscal 20?
It's not here because this is the budget, not what is actually spent. So you don't
Right,
see.
but okay, but we should get a report on that.
Well, I have
To be able to do our work here, we should see.
I have
think
sent you
it's
what's
fair,
called
and
the
I think, Greg, it would be fine.
analysis. And I
I
can't,
think
sorry.
it would be fine, Greg, for you to talk to Jeff after, but I think it's important for the finance committee to see this because I think, in my history of looking at budgets where I worked, we would get the report that would say this is what was budgeted, this is any changes in the budget, this is what's been spent, this is the anticipated balance. And we might make a decision as we get close to the end of the year to use that for something else. But we haven't, all we've seen is this is what's budgeted, this is the anticipated expenses. We haven't seen that other stuff. And I think that's
Well, I
what.
have emailed over the appropriation analysis. I'll be happy to do it again.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
think you have to remember, Greg, that this
Will answer a lot of your questions about unused appropriation.
stuff is second nature to you. And for us, we need to keep reconciling what you're doing with what we're looking at. And you got to try to remember that we need to do that.
I will make sure to give you a copy of the 2019 and the 2018 appropriation analysis, and that will answer a lot of your questions as to unused appropriation. And then the other one is, again, the difference between revenue actual and revenue estimated. And in the past,
Right. Right.
that's been significant, and I have
Yep.
showed that in the financial projection. So
Do
there's
the
where
unused appropriations have to come back? Do
Well,
they
they
have to come
do,
back?
yeah. In case of the, I'm sorry, you went in and out, but in the case of the operating budget, if you don't use it in the year, that it's, you can do an encumbrance, but yeah, it comes back if not spent. The
So it
other,
becomes free cash. So we got to know what those numbers are.
Well, Jeff, I think,
certified cash by the state, yes.
yeah, to Greg's point, I think, you look at FY20 and, we don't know in FY20 what's going to be unappropriated from departments, what they're going to turn back. So it's tough to make that. And then estimated receipts are just that, an estimate. So he's giving you the FY20 budget, and that is what it was anticipated for the year. Now, after July 1, then you go and, Greg's going to look and this free cash will get certified. We'll know what was turned back and
Yeah,
what
but
was
I agree that
estimated receipts. But he's going to give you, he can give you FY19.
Yeah, but Sean, I agree that we don't know, but I mean, the better we can estimate those numbers, the better financial management we can do. So you must
Right,
have
but
some
I
sense
think
of what.
You're asking to put that number in this recap.
Yes,
and
I'm asking for an estimate of what we're expecting to come back for unspent appropriations.
We can give you a trend analysis number. We can give you
Okay.
a trend analysis number.
And I want to be clear that I don't think people have any intention to try to manage the budget in this way, even if we talk about trying to get together with the other two boards later in the summer. And I don't think there's an intention to do that. I think it's just
Right.
to have an assurance that what the plan is going to be okay, and to have that trust there. And obviously, I think I had said to somebody earlier, for a number of reasons. Some of us because things are different, some of us because we don't know. That trust is just not there right now in the way that we need to have it. And I think that will be helpful.
And we're not going to hold, we have no intention of holding you to the numbers. We know they're estimates.
I will get you an estimate of free cash, and I will get you an estimate, and I will send you the appropriation analyses. So both of those would answer a lot of your questions.
You know, and for a lot of the budgeting that when Greg and I meet regularly to go over the budget, a lot of this is reviewing this trend analysis to try to, hone in on the number for the estimated receipts in a way that's, as actual as possible. So, we do quite a bit of this analysis.
I think we'd all be interested in joining you in the trend analysis a little bit.
Debbie?
And I know you just said it, Greg. You said that, it depends what revenue actuals really are as opposed to revenue budget. And you've been very helpful by showing us on some sheet somewhere what the local receipts in actual were versus budget. You gave us that. But what we don't have anything that shows us what the true other budget line, you budget property taxes at, let's just say in 1963 million, what actually happened. And it could be less or more, but it'd be helpful to us to know that, is it exactly, do we always get in chapter 70 or other state or overhead enterprise, all these other revenue items, which are critical. You gave us the local receipts actuals, but the other actuals we don't know. And I think that would another piece of information just so we understand.
We can give that, but understand when it comes to property taxes, they're committed revenue. So unlike some of this other stuff where we just get it when we get it, this other stuff is billed. And so we're expecting that to come back. So it's a much more precise number. What will affect what we bring in is collection rate. Now, our collection rate is over 99%. So it has been, and even during the Great Recession, it was it was about 98%. So it is
Terrific.
still high.
Terrific.
Even during downtimes. The issue that happens is you will still be getting stuff from the prior year. So what usually happens is you might get 99% in the year that you bill for it, but you end up getting the 1% for people who are behind. So ultimately, it typically comes out to about 100%. But we can get you those actual numbers versus the commitment.
One of the reasons that information is going to be important is that you can see, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the letter, Greg, but there's some talk in there about the potential for budgeting for capital in a different way. And we've talked about this before in the Finance Committee, but how would we do that? And that's one of the outstanding questions. How do we know what amount to budget? And we talked about basing it over an average of the last 5 years. That would be a lot of money to try to plan on. And how would we do that? Those are the things that I think will make a difference in that piece. And we might decide that we have to take that out of this letter if we're not ready to make that proposal. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about, and I think having those numbers would help us with that.
There are two ways to budget for capital. Some communities, I think most communities I know of actually take our approach where we rely upon fiscal flexibility to fund capital, plus you have a certain percentage that goes toward borrowing. So under that approach, if you get a lot of free cash, then you can fund more capital that year. If you get less free cash, you can fund less capital. So it goes up and down based on the surplus revenue. And at least the communities I've been associated with and studied, most of them do it that way. But the other way to do it, and I have also been associated with communities that have done it this way, is they outright do an appropriation. They will typically put it into a stabilization fund for capital, And then from there, they'll take it from the stabilization fund and put it toward the capital. Or if they're funding it at the beginning, they'll put a certain amount toward the capital and the rest of it toward the stabilization fund. The challenge in that is that to the degree your reserves go up and down depending on the year, if you're putting a set amount aside, it can become challenging to know how much to set aside.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not
and
just a replacement reserve.
Right. And to Greg's point, my previous community, the capital was in the budget, like not like Dartmouth. And it gets difficult because yearly, I mean, you've seen it, there's always more capital requests than capital dollars available. If you have a set amount, you're constantly playing catch up. If you're using it the way we're doing it here in Dartmouth, you have more flexibility to provide more capital when the funds are available, and you're not just limited to that budget where, okay, this is our annual amount for capital, because things change and sometimes the needs are greater than other years. There's always the needs, and usually the capital needs outweigh the availability of funds.
That's for expanding capital spending, but I mean, you could do a replacement reserve, which simply is geared towards replacing buildings that are running through their useful life. And when it's time to replace those buildings, you will have built up. But that's a 40-year buildup. Yeah. It's like a depreciation rate for replacement of existing buildings. If you want to expand, then you have no idea what to reserve. But for replacement of existing capital, we could come up with a way of doing that.
So it's 7:45. Would you like to go through some of the warrant articles to begin with, or would you like to tackle the letter? We want to get the letter out by Monday because we wanted to give the boards a week or so to absorb it and make sure that they were ready with comments or questions.
Terry, I have the numbers for the enterprise. I was able to send them out before the meeting. Keep in mind, I have not had the auditor, the accountant double check them, but they should be finalized.
Okay. What do you think, guys? Do you want to do the, keep working on the warrant or the letter?
I favor the warrant.
Warrant.
Okay.
Warrant.
Let's go then. So Greg has the enterprise numbers. We were going to try to do that last week if we had it. You want to try to do the enterprise funds?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we're on number 9. 9 would be the first one.
Just 1 second. Let me try to see if this.
Thought we voted on 9 last week.
We did.
Did we? Okay,
That's
sorry.
11
10.
We did 9 and
Now we're on
10.
10. We got to go to 10.
or 10.
10.
Yeah, 10.
That's right, 10, okay. So 10 is funding the solid waste. Oh.
I didn't do it.
I didn't know what happened. I thought I lost Zoom there for a minute.
I'm trying to get the warrant. I'm trying to, 1 second here. I'm not as.
That's okay. I'll read while you work on it.
Yeah.
It's funding the solid waste enterprise fund to see if we'll approve. Is the amount the same, Greg? $1,589,670.
Do you see what I have or no? I guess so.
No.
Wait, is this okay? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
1.6 million.
There we go.
Okay, so the number is 1.
Whoa. Back up.
Just go up a little bit on that page 8, Greg.
Okay.
There you go.
Yep. And the 1297819 is accurate.
Yes, that is what they're requesting, and the one of the major reasons for the increase is, they're having some issues with the recycling and the cost related to that. So
Yeah.
not much of an increase. But.
So would somebody like to move this? I don't make a motion.
Motion to move Article 10.
Thank you.
Second.
Who seconded that?
Lou,
Lou, great. Discussion?
Who motioned it?
Gloria,
Okay. Go ahead.
any questions, discussion? We all good with this? We were kind of.
I just had one
I'm done.
question.
Yeah,
Crapo Hill assessment,
Yeah.
I haven't, that went down. Is it typical for it to decrease or?
It goes up and down. It's based on, keep in mind, there's New Bedford and us in it. So if the percentage of waste goes up for New Bedford, then that can affect what the rate is on our side. Just the amount of trash, it's also the ratio between New Bedford and Dartmouth.
Okay.
any other questions? Okay.
So,
hearing
yeah,
none.
just one
Oh,
quick
yes,
one, Terry.
Yep,
So Greg, the enterprise fund does not have to reserve anything out of its revenue? There's no required reserve building in the
it's not,
enterprise fund?
it's not shown in this article, right? It's gonna be, isn't it gonna be shown on Schedule A?
This is not, it does not need to reserve anything, although they will sometimes put a fund in the
So-
budget.
So the
for-
retained earnings that the solid waste enterprise fund has is just a function of surplus budgets, not reserves that are being purposely put aside.
Yes, so I'll give you very quickly, in fiscal 19, the revenues, the actual revenues, again, this balances out, but the actual revenues were 1,990,000 rounded, and the actual expenditures were 1,464,451. And I know you're saying, well, how come this is higher here? That doesn't include capital. The number I gave you includes capital. So there was a gain, there was a net positive of 455,409 in 19 between revenues and expenditures.
Right, and so what you're showing us in the warrant is a balanced budget
Yes.
so is there fluff in there? Is it possible that this is going to generate a surplus in actuality?
We hope it will have a surplus, but again, this doesn't include capital. Keep in mind, in capital, there's a request for a truck.
Well, the
And
capital's coming out of their retained earnings, right?
it is coming from their retained earnings.
Right, so they have plenty of retained earnings to cover the capital.
Yes, that's
Right.
correct.
Right.
That's correct.
So you're balancing this budget, but in your mind, I mean, it's not necessarily going to end up balancing. We could have a surplus here. In other words, how does it become balanced is, I guess, what I'm asking you. How do you get this to balance exactly like this? Expenses and revenue.
Well, this is only reflecting the revenues necessary to pay for the expenditures. But again, in 19, we took in revenues of 1,919,000.
And what was the budget? What was the budget?
The budget was 1,464,450.
I see. So you're not showing us the actual projected
not.
revenue here.
I am not.
Okay.
Well, we do this every year.
Yes,
Yeah.
he did. Yes,
Yeah. I mean, we're just voting on the expenses.
yes.
Well, no, you're not. You're voting on the revenue too.
No, we're
To the
voting on the
extent
expenses.
You're appropriating revenue to the extent of the expenses. Is there a reason why we don't want to show the enterprises fund's actual projected revenue?
We based how we did this on a model presented to us by the Division of Local Services. So we're basing it on their model Again, when we do our reports to them, what they want is they want us to show the revenues necessary to fund the expenditures. They're not so much concerned about what the revenues actually are, but they're concerned about us having adequate revenues to fund the expenditures. So
Is the
I mean,
town, is the town concerned about what the revenues actually are, or, I mean, there's no event that allows the town to go in and grab any of that retained earnings for the general fund, right?
not use those retained earnings for any other expenditure unless obviously they're reimbursing the town for an indirect.
How about a COVID-19 virus? That's not a reason to go in and grab retained earnings. Can we borrow retained earnings from them?
Jeff, you're not the only one. This is every town looks at some of these enterprise funds, particularly DPW, and wants to get their hands on their retained earnings. But
Well, it makes sense.
well, that's why we have the indirect charges, which
The issue, Jeff, is the monies that came in here were collected from the ratepayers, not the taxpayers. So if you were to use these monies toward the general fund, you would be basically taking monies from ratepayers who don't necessarily reflect the whole town and giving it to the taxpayers. So
Well, the enterprise fund is taking it from the ratepayers. They're taking it from the ratepayers.
But you're not supposed to be using ratepayers to fund the tax.
All right, I understand.
It's not necessarily the same. For example, I don't have sewer and water where I live. So I personally spend nothing on sewer and water, even though others spend a lot on sewer and water because they have town water or sewer, and I myself have a well and a septic system.
The concern that I've heard before about enterprise funds is less that and more that because it's a self-funded part of the budget, there's a thought sometimes that they can add things to those programs that we couldn't add to the rest of the town budget because of the cost. And I think it's important for us to remember that whether or not this is funded by ratepayers, it's still taxpayer money. It's all on the tax bill, and we should be just as conservative with the enterprise funds. And so for that reason, Jeff, I think, but I do think it shows elsewhere in the budget, and I thought it was on Schedule A that it shows where the revenues are. We can see in the budget when this is done.
I have the revenue expenditure sheets. I will, in addition to the appropriation analysis, giving an estimate of free cash, I will also send you the 19 sheets for all the enterprise funds.
Send them to me and I'll send them out to everybody. Send me what we're talking about tonight and I'll make sure that everybody has the same information. So after that discussion, are there any other questions? Okay, so let's vote then. All in favor of Article 10? Aye.
Aye.
Any abstain? Any?
We're not using thumbs up anymore.
I think we should, but something changed with the thing on here. Oh, there we go. Yep. I think we can. A few of you did. So, all right. Are we good?
Yep.
Let's go on. Let's do some more enterprise funds because that was so much fun. Article 11 is the Water Department Enterprise Fund. You want to? There we go. Perfect.
I make a motion to accept the funding of the Water Department Enterprise Fund.
Thank you. Second?
I second it.
Gloria seconds. And the number is now 4806170, and the others remain the same. No, 1160.
Yeah, I mean, the big difference is the decrease in debt service.
Right.
And very quickly, in 19, they took in $5,491,000 in revenue.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, any other questions on this?
Yeah, just Greg, one more point, and then I won't belabor it, but it seems to me if the general fund runs into trouble because of something like this virus, and we run into what you would consider in other environments as a loss, okay? If we experience a loss and so we can't make budget, it seems to me that that's something that should adjust the indirect cost charges to the enterprise funds. I mean, that's part of the cost of doing business, if you will, as the town's general fund. And it seems the enterprise fund should be able to be charged for that through the indirect charges.
Well, we try to fully charge them for all costs related to the enterprise.
All right, so if the virus causes us to have a budget deficit, can we spread that budget deficit out through indirect charges to the enterprise fund?
If it affects the enterprise fund, if it's a cost that's incurred by the town on behalf of the enterprise fund, the answer is yes. So
All right, so we got to think that through.
obviously there are costs that we are incurring that are related to the enterprise fund. So yes, I would say that certain expenditure could be.
But the town overhead is employee benefits and things like that, right, Greg?
No.
It's
not a straight
benefits, health, pension, that workers' comp, unemployment, but it also includes an administrative charge.
Okay.
And the administrative charge is the same for all the enterprise funds, correct? But the other costs are specific to the enterprise fund.
It's not the same because it's based on their overall percentage of budget, so
Right.
or on their commitment number. It's certain different variables, but obviously we take more from the water budget, which is more of the overall budget than we say would take from waterways, which is a much lesser proportion of the budget.
Right.
So it's adjusted for their size.
Yep. All right, any other questions? Okay, all in favor? Let's do this thing. Okay, we're good. All right, thank you.
Article 12.
So Greg, if you're taking notes, it was 9-0 and 9-0 on here. And then Article 12 is the.
So just so you get an idea of what the language is looking like,
Oh, good one, yeah.
I just took it from previous year.
Yeah, that's.
Whoopsie do. How do I get that big sized? Oh, there we go.
So to this point, Gloria is putting in either information from last year's or trying to summarize our conversation. And at the end of the meeting, I'm going to ask you if you want to weigh in on the language, because I think there is something to be said for adding more information, but there's also something to be said for just keeping it simple. So I'll take your input then. But thanks, Gloria, for going back to that. I forgot to review that with people. So Article 12 is the Sewer Department Enterprise Fund. And Greg, do you want to show that so we can see the number?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to take Gloria's off and put mine back.
If you just hit share, and then it will ask you if you want to continue, and when you say
Okay,
say
all right.
yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, there you go.
Nice.
All right, we're on sewer now.
12, yeah. There you go. So 12, 53465.
And the number, just so we're clear, last year's revenue taken in was $5,654,796.
Greg, what is this other department revenue, the 400 grand here and the 300 in the prior warrant? What's that from?
Oh, boy. Let's see, 1 second here. Let me see if there's more description. I do not know specifically. It might be certain betterment revenues. I would have to get an answer for you from the DPW. I mean, certainly the number one revenue source is the sewer rates themselves. I'm not exactly sure what has been lumped in under other department revenue. That number was provided me by the DPW.
That means other DPW departments or other town departments?
No. That's from revenue from the department itself. But I don't know what they could categorized under there. So I would have to get you that answer.
Okay, so the major increases are the water pollution control 2,132,000 versus 2,068,000. If I remember correctly, that's because they're using a new chemical and treating the water, if I remember from the presentation.
That was for the water department, I think.
Yes, I should state,
I'm sorry. Yeah, it is the water department.
it's very important. I should state that throughout the whole budget, there are no, consistent with the financial policy, there are no requests in new staff, except for one. And that is, this does include a new staff person. You may recall that Dave spoke about having issues of having to take staff away from one duty and put them toward other duties that they typically are not chiefly responsible for. So he's trying to get another position. I talked to him a lot about whether it was essential or not. His argument is that currently they have only very, very minimal staffing, and should there be something that occurred in terms of COVID-19, they would be unable to continue to function their facility. What he stressed to me is they have 22 pumping stations in town, 22. And they need someone to go out on a regular basis and monitor these stations. So should they ever be short-staffed, their ability to monitor would be jeopardized. And it's the kind of thing where if you don't address it immediately, it could shut down the whole system. So he felt quite strongly it is an essential position, that they've been having a lot of issues for lack of the staffing, and that it really needs to be funded. So this is the only budget currently including a request for an additional staff person. And again, this is a case where you have to continue to run the system. You can't just put it off for another day.
Okay, Greg, debt service went up 100,000. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Is that the $1 million borrowing that they're doing?
No, that's not factored into this number. That's not factored into this number. They have been having to do a lot of upgrades to their system. One thing that's happened, and I'll try to keep this very quickly, they have, by law, by the federal law, they have to do what's called inflow and infiltration. They have to take measures to cut back the amount of groundwater that seeps into the sewage system. And this is something they have to, by law, do according to maintain their federal permit. All sewer facilities have to do this. It can sometimes be quite significant. You know, I've been associated with communities that 30 to 40% of the wastewater going in the system wasn't actually from the sewer, it was stuff leaking in. So they have been, for example, replacing all manhole covers throughout town with ones that don't leak. And you may recall Dave speaking about this. One of the problems, however, with that is it's increased the amount of solids versus liquids within the system. So for the system to continue, they need to do a number of major upgrades to the system, which are required in order to maintain their federal and state permits. And they've been doing a number of upgrades throughout the last few years. I think they recently went to tertiary treatment. And again, part of the problem here is you have a system that's decades old and quite complicated, by the way. I'm sure Dave would love to give you all a tour, but it requires quite a lot of ongoing work in order to, again, continue to function and for the town to be able to continue to be permitted by state and local authorities.
I move we approve this budget.
I vote we approve.
Okay. Any other questions? All in favor? I can't find anything. There it is. Okay. Nobody abstained, 9-0. Okay. And the language is very similar in the warrant, Gloria, I'm assuming, right? As it was last year? Want to move on to 13? Oh, here we go, Gloria. Yep. Okay. So Article 13 is Dartmouth, it's community media. So that will have to be changed, right?
Then we're doing Article 11 now?
Oh,
13.
13, right?
15.
What happened to,
13.
okay, I'm sorry, 13, yeah.
So 629, 383.
Or does it say community media?
Well, I think that's what they're being called right now, not cable television. When you go to their website, it says, and even on the screen here, it's
I never knew they changed their name, so I'll have
Dartmouth Community Media. But
Okay.
then the, let's hear from somebody who wants to move this article.
Can I just say one thing, Terry?
Yeah.
This was created through a special act, so
Oh.
whether or not I'll change the name will in part, I think, be based on what's specified in the special act.
Okay. Does somebody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
second. Lou seconded it. And discussion, questions?
Yeah, hey Greg,
Yeah.
they get some of their revenue from Comcast. When is that gonna end?
Just one second here. It looks as though I did not.
I believe it's 2022, the contract.
2022?
Yes.
Oh, the con, I'm sorry, I thought you said the revenue, what the revenue was. Okay.
No, Sean just gave me my answer.
How much is it?
618,000.
That's how much we get from Comcast? Yikes.
Well, they're franchise fees based on the number of subscribers for cable television, and it doesn't include internet service or other or phone service. It's just cable television.
So will that be continued?
Well, there's a big discussion about this because more and more people are cutting their cable television and just going with internet. And you know the cable
Got it.
companies have lobbies. It's a big long discussion, but basically
Got
they're trying to cut the franchise agreement, and it could be cut substantially in this next contract. And we've discussed that with DCTV many times.
Thank you. I know where it's.
Is that something that we should be planning for? Should we be discussing how to, I
Yes.
don't know how we could operate right now without them. And
No, you know, I think a lot of the towns are in the same boat. We've had some DCTV board meetings in the past where, you know, it's come up, and, you know, my recommendation is DCTV is one of the best government access or local access channels in the area, and they could provide a service to other towns in the future. And that's something that I think is worth looking at. And Cindy and I have talked about that. And that's would be a revenue stream to keep the operations going. So we'll know more as we get closer to starting to negotiate the contract with Comcast and what their offer is.
In fiscal year 2019, they took in 653,000 in revenues. Of that, 631,000 came from cable access Comcast revenue.
Greg, how were they able to build up such a large retained earnings? They got $500,000 in retained earnings relative to their annual budget. How'd they do that?
I think two reasons. One, they have, in the past, they did not have as big a budget, but the bigger reason is using 2019 as an example. Well, we budgeted, as you see here, oh, I don't have it right here, I'm sorry, but in 2019, I'm looking at something else here. In 2019, we budgeted 611,176, or at least originally what we budgeted, and they spent 557,000. So a lot of it was unused appropriation.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, want to vote? All in favor?
So move.
Okay, looks like 9-0 to me. Let's go on.
Waterways.
Waterways. Article 14.
Okay, so waterways is one of our more, first of all, the retained earnings is 151, but this is one of our more stressed enterprise funds. In 19, they took in 313,106.49 in revenue. I should state they have some monies that they, grant monies they get that are not reflected in that number. They're able to draw against. So that when they have shortages, they are able to do that. I also should state, I believe after 19, they increased their mooring fees such that they can now estimate a greater amount for their mooring fees. So this is a debatable point, but they have, they do have the ability to raise their fees, and the goal is when they are tight, they have to raise their fees to cover their expenditures. Obviously, this year is going to be particularly challenging given the potential effect by the whole COVID-19 on the boat season. The harbor master, in discussing this with him, has indicated they're certainly going to be looking very closely, and if it looks like there's not going to be the same degree in terms of boating and such, they will cut the expenses a bit.
You want to add something, Sean?
No, I was coughing, but I meet with Steve, the harbor master, regularly, and right now the mooring revenues aren't off that much. There's some late people currently, but they've waived the late fees because of this COVID. But he is looking at the staffing, and we were looking before this COVID issue at full staffing. He hasn't had that for the seasonal staff, and now he's just looking at kind of being a little conservative with that and not full staffing, and just seeing making sure they can get the basics done.
And this budget already reflects a cutback. There was a secretarial position that was proposed that was taken out of the budget upon further discussion.
Greg, did they spend the 100,000 in capital that was appropriated last October?
They haven't yet. That's for a boat. I think originally the boat they identified to purchase is not manufactured anymore, so they're looking at other boat manufacturers for this.
So what happens with that? It stays appropriated, and you said the fund balance was 151. It's actually 51 after that, right, Greg?
Now that money has already been appropriated out of retained earnings into a capital article.
Right. So if the retained earnings is 51,000, not 151,000.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the 19 sheet.
Right.
Right.
Any other questions on this? Ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any abstentions? Nope. Good. Okay, 9-0. Senior social daycare.
Okay, so Social Day is actually a trust fund. It is not a true enterprise fund, but we treat it as a self-supporting entity. So it does not have retained earnings certified at the end of the year like the enterprise funds, but again, it's meant to be a self-supporting entity. Now, I want to state I did receive a letter from the COA board asking that the town absorb the overhead for Social Day. I was going to attend a meeting to further discuss that. However, due to the whole COVID-19, I never was able to do that. Should the town support the overhead, that would be a dramatic departure from the past. One of my major concerns is 80 to 90% of the clientele for Social Day is not from the town itself. The majority of our clients are from New Bedford. If we were to not fund the indirects, we would in effect be subsidizing New Bedford residents. So I don't think that's what the taxpayers, using taxpayer money to subsidize residents of another town, I don't think is the appropriate use for those monies. But again, we did receive that request. In terms of Social Day, they do have some challenges. They're more than anyone right now are challenged by the whole COVID-19 crisis, because basically the program's been shut down, and while the revenue has almost completely evaporated, the expenditures have not. So they do have some retainage that hopefully will get them through the short term, but they have some long-term structural issues that make things challenging. You may see here under personnel services, the amount going up, it has gone up. That's not due to actual staff increases. That's due mainly to the fact they lost a grant that they every year would get and no longer will be getting. It was a private grant, not a government one.
Greg, is this program operating right now?
No.
So when I think about the schools, they're obviously required to still be working with students. What are the people doing who are in this program?
I can answer that. They've been helping the Council on Aging staff, Amy and the other staff, with outreach to the elderly, providing Meals on Wheels, providing shopping for necessities. The Council on Aging has been doing a lot of work in outreach to the elderly, so they've been working in that regard.
Okay.
So when you say that it's not operating right now, what was the actual revenue for 19, fiscal 19? It's pretty close to what it's showing here?
No.
As budgeted?
I don't, just one second. Let me see if I can get that.
I found something that says 194,000, which is significantly below, but I might be wrong.
For which year?
For 19. They budgeted 284 and they actually got significantly less, but I'm not sure it's right. It's just that this is the very.
So I'm just going to offer the opinion that
yeah, it's not important.
If there are budgetary problems with this program, the solution is not to waive the indirect costs, in my opinion. I think
No.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
I think that could happen to any of the enterprise funds, and those problems have to be resolved differently.
Yeah, this fund only has about 60,000 of retained earnings, so they can't bear much of a drop in revenue. If they're not functioning, the revenue must be way down for fiscal year 20.
I hate to sound mean, but if it's not serving Dartmouth residents, I'm a little confused.
It is serving Dartmouth residents, but the majority of the clientele is
Right.
not from Dartmouth.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
It's obviously a voluntary program. People sign up for it. A lot of them are funded through I think they call it Coastline Elderly. So they're charged through this service, which I guess helps to subsidize the service. But a lot of their clientele, again, are not Dartmouth residents.
I don't think that we can resolve the problems in the program either, and I think that we can acknowledge that there are, and if I just think these programs have to be self-sustaining, and
they are taking action to try to cut costs. I mean, this obviously right now it's extremely challenging, but before this was occurring, they were trying to take action to cut costs again to make sure that their expenditures meet their revenues.
Do you have a projection of the fiscal 20 revenue or no?
I do not have a
Okay.
up-to-date one, and obviously trend analysis won't help us in that regard. So,
Yeah, Greg, didn't they get, somebody had passed away and gave them a pretty big check?
that was the COA. That wasn't specifically Social Day. I actually asked the lawyer that question, and the lawyer's response was, however, the COA saw fit to spend it for senior purposes. So that was not geared specific to Social Day, although I suppose they could use some of that money towards Social Day.
Okay, thank you.
That's up to the COA, not we. The town itself does not have control over those monies.
Okay.
I move we approve it.
Okay, second? Did we already do this?
Second.
Okay,
Second.
all in favor?
I'm not sure what the finance committee approving this, given all the things we've talked about, that could, in fact, the real picture on this could be a significant shortfall. I mean, what does it mean if the finance committee then approves this without getting into more detail on that? I'm not clear on that.
Greg?
Well, it's kind of an unknown right now.
Right, so why are we approving it?
I think the only reason that we'd be questioning is because we're hearing that this is a program that's under stress, but the proposal is balanced. The proposal here, it's not unlike some of the other.
Well, except that we've been told it's not functioning.
Well, it is functioning. It's just got a very small retained earnings, and there are some things in question. I think another way for us, and I don't think this is something that we would decide on the warrant, but I think there is clearly a need for a review from administration and an investigation into what can be done to better manage the program.
So if they have a significant shortfall because revenue has just dropped out, there's no way it comes back as a liability to the general fund?
It is, there's nothing to prevent that from being asked, the general fund to being asked to cover that.
Well,
So,
what's traditional there? Would we cover it or would we not?
we have never faced, again, at least during my tenure, and I believe long before my tenure, it's always been a self-supported fund. I mean, there have been some indirect subsidies. For instance, they are in the COA building, and we don't charge anything for the use of the COA building to Social Day. So obviously, each time, say there's a capital improvement to the COA building, they benefit from it, but they don't get charged. But then again, a lot of the improvements to the building are funded through the COA, Friends of the COA, and not directly by the town. So,
So if it's our opinion, let's just say if it's our opinion that this fund is going to be underwater and they're going to be short more than the retained earnings that they have because they're going to be down, they're going to be short 70,000, say, in revenue from the budgeted revenue. Should we be instructing them to cut their spending or just relying on them to make the decisions on cutting their spending? What's our job?
Well, I can tell you, Greg and I have been working with Amy this past year. We've had a lot of discussions on how to, make this account commit to balance. So we talked about raising the fees. We talked about the residents from New Bedford coming in. So we're evaluating that, and it wasn't at the point where they had retained earnings, so they were covering the costs, and so it wasn't an emergency situation. Now this year, it could be an emergency situation because of COVID and they're closed. One thing to consider too, it's not uncommon for towns to subsidize an enterprise fund like this. The important part is for the town to know that there's some subsidization going on. So, a lot of times I think you see municipalities with golf courses, they give the appearance that they're breaking even or making money when actually the town is subsidizing them one way or another, either through no indirect costs or things like that. So
I'm just concerned about the finance committee going on record as approving the budget, and then sometime in a couple of months, it becomes very public that this fund was going upside down, and people start saying, well, where was the finance committee with all of this?
Well,
I just want to avoid that. So if that's not an issue, then I'm okay.
I think if that happens, it's going to be related to COVID more than their operations. I mean, it's been a slow drain of their operations, and that's something that we're working on. But, a major decrease in revenue would be related to COVID, which the same can be said for the whole budget.
I think we can put this in the language in our recommendations to the town meeting, Jeff. I think that we can express our concern there.
Okay.
One thing, I got some of the numbers. Last year they had they brought in 194,000 or 195,000 almost in revenue. They still, however, had a fund balance of 57,000, and the reason was they did not spend as they had a fund balance from the year before of 75,000, and also they only spent 212,000. So they did have to use some of their fund balance to support their budget last year in the order of 18,000. So their fund balance went down from 75,000 to 57,000.
Right. They are thin. It's certainly possible that they could go upside down, but
it is very possible, particularly given the fact that they're not currently taking in revenue. I suppose an argument can be made if we are using their people for town services, maybe the town should be compensating them during that period. Of course, that's something that's been budgeted for. So yes, if that argument is made, then it would have to come before the finance committee.
Lou and then Gloria.
I'm assuming that the only expense to the town is the overhead?
It's revenue.
The town pays those, the overhead is already incurred by the town, and we're asking the social day to reimburse the town for costs that were related to the social day and funded by the general. That's what this does here.
So we're supporting it and then getting the money back ourselves because.
Yeah, well, we pay all employees. The general fund pays for health care. All employees, the general fund pays for pension. All employees, the general fund pays, and this isn't something they.
Greg, I'm gonna interrupt because we're almost at 8:30. And Gloria, do you have a question on this?
I did. So when they came to present to us, there was already, some rumblings that they had some concerns. And then we heard shortly thereafter that the overhead, they were going to look to see if the town would cover that. So my question is, if we don't support this article, does that mean this program won't, I guess, start or go into effect?
It's a one-day event.
Well, if they didn't have a budgeted, if we did not vote a budget, then they would not be able to use those monies toward their budget. So yeah, it would basically.
Yeah, but we're only one body here. And you'll remember that on some other smaller issues related to the Council on Aging, they went to the town meeting and got a response that they were looking for. So I think that from our point of view, that the issues raised on this program, as well as there have been some requests in the regular budget from Council on Aging, I think we have to respond to that. I think I'm hearing loud and clear that we think more investigation has to be done here of this program.
Right.
But then
Right.
there's that issue of subsidizing, and there are a couple of other programs that we pay for in the town budget that are just a service to people. We're not collecting income. Okay, so for example, the Youth Commission would be one of those jobs that, and we're going to get to that later. I think that's a philosophical discussion that we can't have right now. I think on this particular article, we have to decide, based on the figures here and based on the plan that's here, do we support this with the caveat that we'll put in the language in the rationale? We're concerned. We think there needs to be some more investigation.
Well, this could be one of those items that we watch very closely as we meet quarterly or monthly, whatever we decide. And those would just be one of those items that we watch very closely.
Okay. Are we ready to vote?
No, I'd like to push the vote off to next meeting, if you don't mind. I'd like to give this some more thought
Okay.
as to how
Push
this,
that off. And we're going to start now anyway, because last week I wasn't watching the time and we went till almost 9, and that's not really fair. What we have to do though for Thursday is the cover letter. And I'm going to ask Greg if you would please, we really need your expertise in looking at what we've put in that letter and let us know. So not right now, but we need your input. And then
numbers, which was what I was focused on. So now I can put my attention toward
Great.
that.
I also, Terry, I revised it as we've been sitting here and sent out the revised enterprise numbers and one other number that were, and a couple of other numbers.
to me
just
and
to get it
I'll
right.
send it out.
So that's the version Greg should look at.
Very good. And then the rationale for the warrant, do you want to weigh in on that? Do you want us to just keep doing it?
Well, everybody's been weighing in on it as we do it, right? I mean, every article you've looked at it thus far.
Yep. I did hear back from Mike O'Reilly and from Christine O'Grady, and I did give that language to, I guess I'll say this to you. If there's some article there that you feel particular about and you'd like to add some information, feel free to send it to me and I'll get it to Gloria. And then we don't have to add another thing to the list of what you're doing, okay?
And just so you know, Terry, there was some questions on that article you recused yourself on.
Yeah.
And I dealt directly with Gloria since you had recused yourself. And it's up to you, Gloria, as to if you want to disseminate that material that Dave Hickox provided you.
Right. I'd have to find where you sent it to me. So basically,
he emailed the response to the questions.
right. I'm just going to pull it up. So Greg had reached out to David Hickox because we were looking for more information. He was not able to come to the meeting, but I'm going to find his response.
There was some issue. I don't know if you got multiple emails of the same thing. He had some problem with his computer.
All I got from you, Greg, today was his quick, here's his response. It was as of 2 o'clock this afternoon. Hi, Greg, the aquifer protection article is a DEP permit requirement to bring the new replacement wells online. Since the 2 new wells are in new locations, the groundwater influence zone delineation changes, thus the map needs to be updated to reflect the new zone 1, 2, and 3 limits. Town meeting has historically adopted the Aquifer Protection District maps with no discussion. Again, and most importantly, this is a Mass DEP requirement to bring the new wells online.
He also sent other emails, and I just looked at your email address, and apparently he did not put that in appropriately. So I'm sending you the emails that he sent to you, but apparently did not get to you because it appears the email address was not correct. So I just sent you 2 emails.
Okay,
you-
so what I can do, because it's past 8:30, is I'll get them and forward them to, Terry, do you want me to give them to you to distribute, or do you want me to just distribute to the group?
You should distribute to the group. If you
Okay,
can
I'll do that. I'll
would-
do that then.
Okay. So Thursday, it's just going to be us. We don't have anybody presenting. There was a question about having Steve come. I think Janine had asked if we should have Steve come on the grant. I guess I'll leave that up to people. We talked about that last week. Do we want to have him come and talk about the grant, or do you feel like you have what you need from the grant application that came from Deborah? This was on the feasibility study and the article where we're going to be asking the town to reimburse the reserve fund for the 16,000 that would be the match.
For Dyer's Landing.
Yep, and people had some questions about that. So you all got the grant, right? You were able to see what's involved with that. What's your pleasure? Would you like him to come, or do you feel like you have what you need? Good. So then that'll be great, because we'll just use the time ourselves and try to finish up. Priority will be the cover letter, because if we want to get that out to people on Monday to have some time to absorb it, we're going to need to get that done. That took a little bit of time to pull everybody's information together. And then Jeff had a question in there, but we'll get that answer from Greg when he looks at it. And then the next priority is the guts of the warrant, which is the operating budget and the capital budget and all that stuff. Okay.
Thanks, Terry, for taking the time to put all that together.
Yeah, I thank you. This has been a good process. I think the best in the time that I've been on the finance committee. I feel like everybody's participating. It's really helpful. I know you feel like you're asking too many questions sometimes, but I think sometimes you do ask too many questions, actually. I'll say that, but I think it's helpful for the group to have that information. It's good information for us. So thanks a lot, everybody. And
Thank
we'll see you
you.
on Thursday.
you.
Okay.
And then I got a motion to
All
adjourn.
right,
Motion to
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
Who wants
adjourn.
the motion?
Second, third, fourth.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. See you later.